The chamber falls silent. Every eye turns to the door. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's words die mid-sentence as the unmistakable figure enters. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't planned. King Charles III has just walked into Parliament, and what happens next will change everything. The cameras are rolling. The world is watching. And nobody, absolutely nobody, saw this coming. The date was supposed to be ordinary. Just another Tuesday in Westminster. The House of Commons was in full session, debating the latest economic reforms proposed by the Labour government. Prime Minister Keir Starmer stood at the dispatch box, his voice steady and measured as he outlined his vision for Britain's future. MPs lined the green benches, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in opposition. The usual theatre of British politics was playing out exactly as it had for centuries, but in the span of just 60 seconds, everything would shatter. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the chamber began to open slowly, deliberately, the kind of movement that draws attention not through noise but through the weight of its presence. A senior clerk stepped in first, his face pale, his expression confused. He wasn't supposed to be interrupting. Nobody interrupts Prime Minister's questions. Nobody interrupts a major policy speech. But there as he was, frozen in the doorway, looking back at someone behind him. And then the murmurs began. It started as a ripple. Conservative MPs on one side of the chamber noticed first. Their conversation stopped mid-word. Labour MPs, focused on their leader, took a moment longer to sense the shift. But when they turned, when they saw who was entering, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. King Charles III stepped through the doorway, not in ceremonial robes, not in the full regalia of state occasions, but in a dark suit. His expression was grave, determined. This was not a king arriving for pageantry. This was a monarch with something urgent to say. Keir Starmer's voice faltered. The Prime Minister, known for his composure as a former director of public prosecutions, actually stuttered. His papers remained in his hand, forgotten. His mouth opened as if to continue his speech, but no words came out. The silence in the chamber was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. Every MP, every clerk, every journalist in the press gallery above was transfixed. The Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, rose from his chair, his face a mixture of shock and protocol-driven confusion. In over 300 years of parliamentary history, nothing like this had ever happened. The constitutional implications hit like a thunderbolt. Britain is a constitutional monarchy. The king reigns, but Parliament rules. The separation between Crown and Commons is sacred, maintained through centuries of tradition and carefully balanced power. The monarch delivers the King's speech at the state opening of Parliament, yes, but that's a ceremonial event scripted by the government itself. The King reads words written by the Prime Minister. He doesn't write his own. He doesn't intervene. He doesn't interrupt. That's the unwritten rule that keeps the whole system functioning. So what was Charles doing here unannounced? Walking into the heart of British democracy while it was in session. Security personnel moved quickly but carefully. You could see them in the background of the live feed, speaking urgently into radios, their hands hovering near their sides. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't cleared. Parliamentary security doesn't just let the king walk in unannounced, which meant someone high up had made this happen. Someone with enough authority to bypass every protocol, every security check, every piece of constitutional convention that governed how the monarchy and parliament interacted. The question burning in everyone's mind was simple. Why? The king moved forward into the chamber. His steps echoed on the stone floor. MPs who had been seated began to stand, not out of formal protocol, but out of sheer uncertainty about what was happening. Do you stand when the king interrupts Parliament? There's no rule for this. There's no precedent. The last time a monarch tried to assert direct power over Parliament was in 1642 when King Charles I attempted to arrest 5 MPs. That event triggered the English Civil War. Every schoolchild in Britain learns that story. Every MP knows what happened next. Civil War, execution of the king, the establishment of Parliament's supremacy. So when Charles III walked into that chamber, centuries of history walked with him. The live cameras caught everything. BBC Parliament was broadcasting, as always. A feed that normally attracted only political enthusiasts and insomniacs. But within minutes, Every major news network had cut to the footage. Sky News interrupted its afternoon programming. The BBC News channel broke away from its scheduled bulletin. CNN, Fox News, international broadcasters across the globe all picked up the feed. Social media exploded. Twitter, now X, saw King Charles and Parliament trend worldwide within 60 seconds. People were watching history unfold in real time and nobody knew where it was heading. Keir Starmer finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he began, the formality automatic, even in shock. The Prime Minister's face was a carefully controlled mask, but his eyes betrayed his confusion. This was a man who had prosecuted criminals, who had faced down hostile witnesses, who had navigated the brutal world of Labour Party politics to reach the top. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this moment. The King was not supposed to be here. The King was not supposed to interrupt. And yet here he stood. Charles raised a hand, a gentle but firm gesture. He didn't need to speak yet. His presence alone commanded the room. Every eye remained fixed on him. The MPs who had started to stand were now fully on their feet, creating a strange tableau frozen between sitting and standing ovation, between welcome and warning. The Speaker remained standing too, his hand gripping the edge of his chair. In his role, Sir Lindsay was the voice of Parliament, the defender of its privileges, the guardian of its procedures. But what do you do when the King himself breaks those procedures? The tension was physical. You could feel it through the screen. Journalists in the press gallery were frantically typing, their fingers flying across keyboards as they tried to file breaking news updates while simultaneously watching the scene unfold below them. Phone cameras appeared despite the rules against them. MPs were filming. Staff were filming. Everyone wanted a record of this moment because everyone sensed they were witnessing something that would be replayed for decades, analysed in history books, debated in constitutional law classes. This was the moment when something fundamental shifted. King Charles cleared his throat and the sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of his 75 years. But more than that, it carried something deeper: authority. Not the inherited authority of crown and sceptre, but the earned authority of a man who had waited longer than any heir in British history to wear that crown. His words were measured, precise, and utterly unprecedented. "Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, honourable members," he began, using the traditional parliamentary forms of address. But what came next was anything but traditional. "I come before you today not to observe tradition, but to break with it. I do so not out of disrespect for this ancient institution, but out of profound respect for the people it serves. I am aware more acutely than anyone in this chamber of the constitutional boundaries that separate Crown and Parliament. I am aware that my presence here, unannounced and uninvited, violates every protocol we hold dear, but I am also aware that protocols mean nothing if the nation they serve is in crisis, and make no mistake, we are in crisis." The chamber remained frozen. Not a single MP interrupted. Not a single voice called out in protest or support. Even the traditional parliamentary practice of hear, hear or dissenting murmurs was absent. Everyone was waiting to understand what crisis the King was talking about. The economic reform Starmer had been discussing, hardly a national emergency. International relations? Nothing had broken in the news today, so what had driven the monarch to take this extraordinary, possibly unconstitutional step? Charles continued, and as he did, the pieces began to fall into place. "Last night I received information from the Joint Intelligence Committee, information so concerning, so urgent, that it could not wait for normal channels. Information that this government," and here he looked directly at Starmer, "has not yet shared with Parliament or with the British people. Information about threats to our national security that require immediate parliamentary attention and public awareness." The reaction was instant. Conservative MPs erupted, not in cheers or jeers, but in shocked exclamations. Opposition leader Rishi Sunak was on his feet. Immediately, his face flushed. Labour MPs turned to look at Starmer, searching their Prime Minister's face for confirmation or denial. Starmer himself had gone very still. His political instincts were clearly at war with his constitutional understanding. The king had just accused his government of withholding critical security information from Parliament. If true, this was a devastating allegation. If false, this was an unprecedented royal overreach that could trigger a constitutional crisis that would make Brexit look like a minor disagreement. The Speaker was now actively intervening, his voice rising above the growing noise. Order! Order! The traditional call that had silenced parliamentary debates for centuries. But this wasn't a debate. This was something entirely new. Sir Lindsay Hoyle faced an impossible situation. Does he ask the king to leave? Does he allow the king to continue? Does he suspend the sitting? Every option carried enormous implications. The constitutional experts watching from universities, legal chambers, and think tanks across the country were already drafting analyses. This moment would define British constitutional law for generations. Charles raised his hand again, and remarkably, the chamber quieted. The king's personal authority, built over decades of public service despite years of tabloid scrutiny and public scepticism, was evident in that moment. Love him or loathe him, respect for the office and the man commanded attention. I have copies of the intelligence briefing here, Charles said, and an aide who had entered quietly behind him stepped forward with a leather document case. Mr. Speaker, I am formally requesting that this intelligence be shared with the House today in closed session, if necessary, but shared nonetheless. The British people deserve to know what threatens them. Parliament deserves to make informed decisions. The document case sat on a table near the Speaker's chair, an object that suddenly contained the future of the British political system. If those documents contained genuine, urgent intelligence that the government had suppressed, Starmer's government could fall. If those documents were routine security briefings mischaracterised by royal intervention, the monarchy itself could face existential questions. The stakes could not be higher. Keir Starmer stepped forward, his composure rebuilding with each step. The lawyer in him was taking over from the shocked politician. Your Majesty, he said, his voice now firm and clear. With the greatest respect for your office and your person, what you are doing here today threatens the very foundation of our democratic system. The Crown does not direct Parliament. The Crown does not reveal intelligence briefings. The Crown does not determine what this House debates or when. His words were careful, respectful in form, but still hard in content. This was the Prime Minister defending parliamentary sovereignty against royal interference. The two men stood facing each other across the chamber floor. King and Prime Minister, Crown and elected government. The oldest tension in British political history made manifest in flesh and blood. Every eye in the chamber moved between them, watching this constitutional confrontation unfold. The live broadcast was now being watched by millions. In pubs across Britain, afternoon drinkers had stopped their conversations. In offices, workers had gathered around televisions and computer screens. In homes, people were calling family members, texting friends, sharing clips that were already going viral. The nation was watching its political system stress test itself in real time. Charles responded, and his words would be quoted for decades. Prime Minister, you are correct. The Crown does not direct Parliament, but the Crown has a duty, a sacred duty, to warn Parliament when the government of the day fails to do so. I am not here to govern. I am not here to legislate. I am here to ensure that those who do govern and legislate have the information they need. If that is unconstitutional, then charge me with it. Impeach me if you must, but do not ignore what I have brought before you today simply to preserve a comfortable fiction that all is well. The chamber exploded into noise. MPs were shouting now, some at the King, some at the Prime Minister, some at each other. The carefully maintained decorum of Parliament had shattered. Conservative MPs were demanding that the intelligence briefing be heard. Labour MPs were insisting on the constitutional impropriety of royal interference. Scottish National Party MPs were calling this evidence of why Scotland needed independence from the Westminster system. Liberal Democrat MPs were caught between their respect for constitutional procedure and their curiosity about what the documents contained. The Speaker was banging his gavel repeatedly, calling for order that was not coming. In the chaos, something remarkable happened. A backbench MP, someone whose name most of the public wouldn't recognise, stood up and simply waited. Her name was Margaret Thornley, a Labour MP from a northern constituency, known for her quiet diligence rather than her rhetorical flourishes. She didn't shout. She didn't gesture wildly. She just stood, hands at her sides, waiting. One by one, other MPs noticed her. The noise began to subside, not from the Speaker's commands, but from the simple dignity of one person standing in silence amid the storm. When the chamber had quieted enough, she spoke, and her voice carried perfectly in the acoustics of the historic room. Mr. Speaker, Your Majesty, Prime Minister, we are behaving like children when the adults have left the room. We are the House of Commons. We are the elected representatives of the British people. Whatever has happened today, whatever constitutional questions have been raised, whatever intelligence may or may not exist in that document case, we are still Parliament. We still have a job to do. And that job is not to shout at each other like market traders, but to deliberate, to question, and to serve the people who sent us here. The simplicity and truth of her words cut through everything. MPs on both sides of the chamber began to sit down. The shouting stopped. The moment of pure chaos began to crystallise into something more structured, more parliamentary. The Speaker seized the opportunity. The Honourable Member for Darlington speaks wisely. This House will come to order. We will proceed according to our rules and traditions, even in circumstances that are, and here he paused, searching for the right word, unprecedented. Prime Minister, you have the floor. You may respond to His Majesty's allegations and request. Starmer took a long breath, visible even on camera. When he spoke, his tone had shifted, less defensive, more explanatory. Your Majesty, Mr. Speaker, honourable members, the intelligence briefing the King refers to was indeed received by this government last night. It concerns potential cyber threats to our national infrastructure. The Joint Intelligence Committee's assessment is that these threats are serious but not imminent. We were planning to brief the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament this afternoon, as is proper procedure. We were not withholding information from Parliament. We were following the established protocols for handling classified intelligence. The explanation was reasonable, procedural, exactly what you would expect from a government handling sensitive security information. But it raised an obvious question that Rishi Sunak, the Conservative opposition leader, immediately articulated. Prime Minister, if the protocols were being followed, why did His Majesty feel compelled to bring this matter directly to Parliament? What in that briefing was so concerning that it prompted the King, who has spent his entire life respecting constitutional boundaries, to take this extraordinary step? It was the question everyone was thinking. Charles had waited 73 years to become king. He had endured decades of media scrutiny, public criticism, and constitutional restraint. He had seen his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, provide a masterclass in political neutrality for 70 years. He knew better than almost anyone alive the limits of royal power in modern Britain. So for him to break those limits, to violate those boundaries, suggested something truly serious. Either the intelligence was far more alarming than Starmer was admitting, or Charles had made a catastrophic error in judgment. There was no middle ground. The King spoke again, and this time his voice carried a note of frustration. The briefing classified this threat as non-imminent, based on current intelligence, but that same briefing noted significant gaps in our understanding of the threat actors' capabilities and timelines. It acknowledged that our critical infrastructure, from power grids to water systems to financial networks, could be compromised within days if hostile actors chose to act. It recommended immediate parliamentary approval for emergency funding and expanded surveillance authorities, and it stated explicitly that delay could prove catastrophic. He paused, letting those words sink in. That briefing was delivered to the government at midnight last night. It is now 2:00 in the afternoon. 14 hours have passed. Parliament was not scheduled to be informed until this afternoon's Intelligence Committee meeting. Behind closed doors, with no public awareness and no parliamentary debate until next week at the earliest, I judge that delay unacceptable. The chamber was silent again, but this time it was the silence of MPs processing information rather than the silence of shock. What Charles was describing did sound serious. It also sounded like the kind of intelligence briefing that governments received regularly.